Following hot on the heels of the Marines and the Nids, it's time for the boys. And this video is going to go through again 5 units that in my opinion are worth considering if you are putting together an orc list that is just maybe a slight bit on the competitive side, and some units that if you are maybe going to a tournament or just playing in a slightly stronger meta, may not be something you bring every single game, but are data sheets that are at least worth looking up and considering and weighing as to whether you can find a place for them in your army. So again, this isn't going to be in any order from like best to worst or anything like that. It's just 5 data sheets that when I'm putting together an orc army list, I look at and think if I'm trying to play a slightly stronger game, I'll probably at least consider including these. And first up today, it's one of my favourite orc characters. It's the named version of the beast boss on Squigosaur duel kit, and that is someone that will really put the fear of Gork and Mork into your opponent, and that is of course Moz Rog Scagbad. At 195 points, he isn't exactly cheap, but for that value you get a whopping stat line with a 10-inch move, toughness 10, 9 wounds, a 3-up save backed up by not only a 4-up invuln, but also a very rare and very strong 4-up Feel No Pain to take even more damage away from actually going into him. It is a genuinely terrifying profile, defensively especially, and it means that even though he lacks lone operative and he can't join any units, so the enemy can very easily target him and shoot at him, it will still take a significant amount of firepower to actually put him down. And if you use the terrain on the board well and your table has a good enough amount of terrain, then it isn't that hard, and I speak from experience here, it isn't that hard to keep him relatively safe and hidden until you declare a warg, and then he can just charge into the line and just rip things apart in melee. And then when he's in melee, not only defensively is he very strong, but on the output front he is also really good. He's got Gut Ripper, which is an excellent anti-monster and anti-vehicle weapon, having both of those 4+, meaning he is perfect for chucking a load of 3 damage attacks into big things like knights and tyrannofexes and all the other big scary monsters in the game. And then on top of that, he also gets 3 extra attacks from Big Chomper, which is his mount, and Big Chomper's jaws are strength 7, -2 AP, and a flat 4 damage, and they have devastating wounds. So his mount alone can potentially be doing 12 mortal wounds to an enemy, which is really quite terrifying. On top of that, he also gets bonuses to his damage against vehicles and Titanic units, so he gets +1 damage from his attacks into vehicles and +2 damage against Titanic, so he can do a huge amount of damage. Like Gut Ripper can be getting up to 5 damage per swing into things like knights, so he can do a huge amount of damage to them just through that 4 or 5 damage attacks that he can do. And then on top of that, he also gets a rule that gives him critical wounds on a 5+ when he is charged. So those 4 damage dual attacks will be doing a flat 4 mortal wounds on 5s rather than 6s on a turn that he's charged in. So obviously in a warg with that 10-inch move, you can move him up, you can advance him, you can charge him in. He gets the bonus of the warg of the extra attacks as well, so he's going to be getting a huge number of attacks. And if you send him into a vehicle, even something like a Land Raider or a Knight, he is just going to be doing so much high damage attacks, getting those mortal wounds on 5s rather than 6s from the jaws, and he can just outright kill, or at least completely cripple, almost any vehicle in the game when he does get a charge in. He is really good. He's incredibly tanky, all things considered, despite being targetable, and against the right target, his damage output is just quite frankly disgusting. Moving on from the big and mighty Moz Rog, we now go down to the small and definitely not mighty, because the next choice in my list is the humble Gretchen, who, yes, I know, are pretty much the weediest little gits you can ever come across, but they are actually quite good. Sure, they're only toughness 2 and they don't even have a 6-up save, they don't have any save unless they're in cover, they just die in droves to even stuff like Bolter Fire, but they are unbelievably cheap. A max squad of 20 of the critters plus 2 runt herds only sets you back 90 points. and runt herds are 2 wounds each, so that's 90 points for 24 wounds, and that works out to just under 4 points per wound. So that's actually really good value for even a big 20-man squad of these guys. So they are great at just sitting back near your deployment, holding some objectives near your side of the board and just keeping it in your control all game long. And then on top of that, not only are they just sneaky objective holders, they have another benefit in their thieving scavengers rule, which lets you, when they're on an objective marker, roll a d6, and on a 4+, you gain a command point. So they can not only be used to sit there, hold objectives on your side of the board, and also be really good ways to zone out enemy deep strikers as well, but then potentially they can gain you a couple of extra CP over the course of the game. So Gretchen, they may not be very flashy or exciting, but they're a really useful unit to have. And even if you don't want to invest that 90 points, just bringing 10 and a runt herd for 45 is really cheap. Like, you will almost certainly not miss that in your list, and it can at the very least generate you 1 or 2 command points over the course of the game, and obviously get you those primary points as the game goes on. The next unit I really like is one that I think is really strong in certain competitive lists at the moment, especially if you are running like a big green tide. This is the Nob with the Warg banner. And this is an odd little individual unit. It's 70 points, which seems a tad pricey for a toughness 4, 3 wound, 4 up save profile, but he is a leader, so he can join boys and nobs, which does give him a bit of extra survivability. The really key thing for this guy, and why he's worth 70 points in my opinion, is his abilities. His weapons, both ranged and melee, are kind of meh. He has a custom shooter for some bolter shots and a strength 8 2 damage banner that he can hit with in melee, but really you bring this guy for the boss is watching and plant the Warg banner. The boss is watching gives him a 4-up invuln and an OC value of 5 in a Warg, which is really useful. It means that when you get into a Warg and him and his squad, move up and advance and charge in, they can very easily get onto an objective that an enemy sat on, and with that improved OC value that he has, you can potentially flip an objective, and of course he's a bit more durable as he does it thanks to that 4-up invuln. But in my opinion, Plant the Banner is the real key ability. This gives you a once per battle ability where you get to essentially Warg again on his unit. So as we all know, the Warg gives you a turn of advance and charge, a 5-up invuln, and some extra attacks and strength, which is really good. It's a very strong army-wide ability, but you can only do it once. This allows him and his squad to do it twice in a game, and that really can be game-changing. Having a second turn of advancing and charging, as well as getting a bucket load of extra attacks on something like a Nob squad or a Boy squad, can mean an enemy unit that thought it was safe, thought the Warg was over, and now you can't advance and charge on anything, may suddenly find itself either dead, or at the very least, surrounded by 20 bloodthirsty Orc boys. It's a very clutch ability to be able to pull off, I think, in turns 4 or even 5 if you really need to go and grab an objective that is just a bit too far away. And if you've used your Army Warg in turn 2, for example, to get a load of stuff up the board, having it again on a unit just to pull off that last ditch charge, or to just keep them alive with that 5-up invuln, can be the difference between losing or winning the game. And I think if you build a list around that, knowing that this guy has that ability, so this squad of Orc boys or this squad of Nobs is going to go somewhere where they may need to make a bigger charge towards the end of the game, or they're going to be on an objective and you think, I just need these guys to survive, so I will, use this ability to get that 5-up invuln just for the last turn of the game, can be really useful. And I think if you plan around him, he can be pivotal in making a good Orc army list. Fourth in this video is another humble, understated unit for the Orcs, in my opinion, the lovingly ramshackle, shoddily constructed, yet bizarrely durable truck. This is the Orc version of the Rhino, of course. It's a bit flimsier, it's only toughness 8, it's got a 4-up save and 10 wounds, but it can carry 12 Orcs in it, and it moves a whopping 12 inches. So it not only gives you some much needed protection for your boys, but it also massively improves their movement, essentially doubling it by having a 12-inch move. It does have some own personal durability as well, with a token in run of a 6-up, which is kind of neither here nor there. It's not really going to save you, but it does also restore a wound in each of your command phases. So this truck is a vehicle that, excuse the pun, it can keep on trucking. But the really big thing that I love about the truck, it's great for carrying your boys, giving them some extra protection, giving them some extra movement, just being a general pain in the ass after they've got out. But the big thing is, what do you pay for this? Bearing in mind it's a toughness 8, 10 wound 4-up save model itself, which is not amazing, but it's not like a grot. It's got some survivability, especially against light arms fire, and what you pay for this is 50 points. This thing is about as cheap as 10 Gretchen, and let me tell you, it's more durable than 10 Gretchen by a long, long way. You can also give it a Wrecking Ball, which adds to the value even more because that is a weapon that is strength 10, so you can actually get some value out of the tank shock strat with this as well, potentially rolling 10 or even 12 dice against a toughness 9 or lower enemy, and every 5-up being a mortal wound means that even if you just charge in a truck, which most people aren't going to be that worried about, can potentially get you 3 or 4 mortal wounds onto an enemy target after it's charged, which again, for 50 points is a really, really good output for what you pay for this. I personally think that the truck is a great thing to run, and it gets even better like the more you bring. Because it's only 50 points, you can easily bring 6 of them, and if you are running a full mounted list with a load of the buggies, a couple of battle wagons and 6 trucks in, with all your boys mounted in them and just charging up the board ready to get into the enemy's face, it's going to be really hard for your opponent to take out all of those trucks. And so at least a good 3 or 4 should make it to get their boys out and then charge into the opponent. And then after that, they can just drive around the battlefield, tank shocking stuff, or just generally charging into units that aren't good in melee. And they are going to have a really hard time. Like even just general intercessors will have a hard time getting through a toughness 8, 10 wound, 4+ save model that regens a wound in each of your command phases. So trucks, super cheap, and that makes them super, super good in my opinion. And then finally, we have the last unit in this video that I think is worth considering if you are building any kind of Orc competitive list, and that is the big, long-ranged Daka guns themselves, the Mech Guns. And these have always been fairly great for Orc players. They allow you to bring some heavier punch to your army, and they hit on 4s thanks to the grots shooting them. So they've always just been very high strength, long ranged, slightly better than your typical Orc shooting, which is a really nice thing to have, especially if you are running a very shooty heavy list. And in 10th edition, these things are still very, very solid. They're only 45 points each, and that gets you a toughness 5, 6 wound model with a 5-up armor and a 6-up invuln. So it's not like they're super tanky by any means, like they're not really, but with their long range, their semi-decent number of wounds, they can at least survive like light scattered bolter fire that may come your way. Obviously if your opponent is aiming las cannons at them, they will die, but I imagine you're probably going to have other stuff in your list that is going to be a better target for enemy las cannons. They come in squads of 1 to 3, so for 135 points you can get a solid number of quite damaging shots downrange at the enemy, and like before, you still get to choose one of 4 options. The tractor cannon is going to be a brilliant anti-flyer weapon if they ever come back into vogue, but that is seeming unlikely at the moment, whilst the bubble chucker is now a lot more reliable because you now roll to see what kind of bubble you get before you choose targets. It used to be in previous editions that you chose your targets and then rolled to see what kind of bubble you got, so you could end up getting a load of anti-infantry shots when you were shooting into a tank, or just one super strong las cannon style shot into like a guardsman squad. So that is a nice change, that you now know what profile the gun is going to be before you decide what to shoot at, so you can target it a lot more effectively now. But I do think that in general, you're probably still going to be going for either the smasher gun or the custom mega cannon. The Mega Cannon is technically a bit better, I think. It's got more shots, it's better strength, and it has better damage, but it does lose out to the Smasher Gun in 12 inches of range, as well as a pip of AP, and also in some ways, the reliability of flat 3 damage from the Smasher Gun is, some people prefer that to d6. Like averages, if you roll like purely going by the dice, d6 is better than 3, but I know a lot of people prefer that reliability and just knowing it's going to be a 3 rather than a 1 or a 2. And then the Mega Cannon is also hazardous, which is a downside, so you do risk those nasty 3 mortal wounds on your Mech Guns when you fire it. But I think the Mega Cannon or the Smasher Gun are both very valid options, and it sort of depends what you're going up against. If you need that potential d6 damage against enemy vehicles and the high strength 12, the Mega Cannon will be better. If you know there's lots of enemy elite infantry like Wraith Guard or Terminators or Tyranid Warriors, maybe the Smasher Gun would be a better fit for your army. But in general, I think they're great, and I think for that relatively cheap 45 points a model, fitting at least 1 or 2 of these in is always going to be worth it. So that is going to be it for the Orks, from the mighty Beast Boss to the lowly Gretchen and all the way to the 48-inch range Mech Guns. There are a fair few good options for Orks in 10th edition. I do think it's worth saying they are going to benefit massively with some of the new detachments that will come in their codex. If you are going Daka heavy at the moment with Orks, it does feel a bit not amazing because the detachment rule is so melee focused. But when they get perhaps some kind of Bad Moons detachment, I think things like the Mech Guns, as well as possibly Looters and Flash Kits, may well get jumped up to a very, very solid spot themselves. But of course, I would love to know what you think of this list and also your top 5 Ork units from the index so far. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me, but until next time, I'll catch you later, guys.